It started as an ordinary day for a young black woman in her small-town community, but a routine traffic stop would spiral into a nightmare she could never have imagined. In today's story, we uncover the disturbing truth about a police officer who abused his power in shocking ways, turning what should have been a moment of public service into a cruel gain for his own twisted amusement. Who was this man behind the badge? What led him to target innocent lives, and how was he finally exposed? Stay tuned as we delve into the real events that shed light on corruption, racism, and the fight for justice. This is a story about power, accountability, and the resilience of one woman determined to have her voice heard. But the question remains, what exactly happened, and how did this cop's actions finally catch up with him? Let's dive in. The woman, let's call her Mia, was heading home from work when the flashing lights appeared in her rearview mirror. At first, she thought it was just a routine stop, maybe a broken taillight or a missed signal. But what should have been a simple exchange quickly turned into something far more sinister. The officer, known around town as someone who rarely played by the rules, didn't seem interested in explaining why she'd been pulled over. Instead, his questions felt sharp, his tone condescending, and his words carried an unsettling edge. Mia's instincts told her something was off, but she complied, hoping to de-escalate the situation. Little did she know, this wasn't about a traffic violation. For the officer, this was about control and amusement, targeting someone who looked like her. Behind his badge was a man with a history of unchecked misconduct, and this time, his actions would have devastating consequences. Mia was ordered out of her car, her heart racing as she tried to stay calm. The officer's demeanor grew colder, his questions more invasive, but none of it made sense. She hadn't broken any laws. The longer the encounter dragged on, the more Mia felt trapped, her every word scrutinized as if he was searching for a reason to escalate. Around them, the quiet night offered no witnesses, no one to step in and ask why things were going so far. Unknown to Mia, this officer had a troubling reputation, a string of complaints from people of color who claimed he used his authority to intimidate and humiliate. Most of their stories were ignored, their voices drowned out by a system that protected its own. But this time, the officer crossed a line he couldn't erase. As Mia was cuffed and taken away without explanation, she couldn't have known this moment would spark a fight far bigger than just her case. As Mia sat in the back of the police car, fear and confusion consumed her. She replayed the moments before her arrest over and over, searching for something, anything, that could explain why this was happening. The officer, meanwhile, seemed almost smug, his actions deliberate as he avoided giving her clear answers. The drive to the station felt endless, each passing second amplifying her sense of helplessness. When they arrived, Mia was processed like a criminal, her dignity stripped away piece by piece. Still, she remained defiant, determined to speak out. But as the hours ticked by in the cold, dimly lit holding cell, she couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't just about her. The officer's confidence wasn't random. It was the kind that came from knowing he'd gotten away with this before. Yet, unbeknownst to him, his time was running out. Someone was about to start asking questions he couldn't dodge. Hours later, just as Mia began to feel the weight of despair settling in, a strange commotion echoed through the station. Another officer entered, his face tense as he whispered to the one who had arrested her. Their exchange was brief but heated, with glances darting in her direction. Mia couldn't hear their words, but something was shifting, something the arresting officer clearly hadn't anticipated. What Mia didn't know was that a passerby had recorded her traffic stop, capturing the unnecessary force and intimidation she endured. The video had already begun circulating online, drawing attention far beyond the small-town precinct. Calls were flooding in from community leaders, demanding answers. As word spread, the officer's past misconduct began resurfacing. People who had stayed silent before now came forward, determined to share their own stories. Mia's case was no longer just hers. It was the spark that threatened to expose a much darker pattern hidden in plain sight. The video of Mia's arrest spread like wildfire, sparking outrage from people far and wide. Protests erupted outside the station, with chants demanding justice not only for Mia, but for everyone who had suffered under this officer's abuse of power. Under mounting pressure, the department had no choice but to place him on leave and open an investigation. For Mia, the fight wasn't over. She refused to back down, filing a formal complaint and working with activists who pushed for accountability. As the investigation unfolded, shocking revelations came to light. The officer had dozens of prior allegations against him, many dismissed without proper review. This time, however, the evidence was undeniable, and his actions couldn't be ignored. The final twist came when another officer stepped forward as a whistleblower, exposing that the department had been quietly covering up complaints for years. Mia's courage had uncovered not just one bad cop, but an entire system built to protect him. The truth was out, and the ripple effects were undeniable. The officer was arrested and charged, finally facing the consequences of his actions. For Mia, it was a bittersweet victory. While she couldn't undo the trauma of that night, her bravery had sparked change, not just for herself, but for others who had been silenced for too long. The department launched a full review, and several officers resigned as their roles in covering up misconduct were exposed. Community leaders began pushing for reforms, demanding transparency and accountability to prevent something like this from ever happening again. Mia's story became a symbol of resilience and the power of speaking out, even when the odds seemed impossible. As she walked out of the courthouse, surrounded by supporters, she felt a renewed sense of purpose. This wasn't just her fight, it was a step toward justice for everyone who had been wronged.